It's Marianne Goldweber, spiritual teacher, professional medium, owner of a village, personal and spiritual development center here in Cleveland, Ohio. Coming to you live tonight, obviously, from Marianne's house patio here at the development center. So grab your cuppa and your notebook and let's talk about tonight's inspired message. Sorry I'm late, but there was a guy over here with a motorcycle who was just gabbing, and I knew he was going to turn it on and pull away eventually, so I couldn't get on right away, so I'm sorry I'm late. The cool thing is these are on repeat, so you, at least for the next month on Facebook, you can actually watch it again. But I also upload all of these to my YouTube channel. So if you want to see the archived podcasts on all these different topics, go there. So anyway, I'm just glad you guys are going to join me tonight. So yeah, wow, what a weird week. We're coming up on the new moon, or excuse me, the full moon is going to be on the 28th, 29th. And that's always a time of, the moon affects our emotion. And so it usually energizes us during the full moon. Okay, so if you think about it, like, it's time to bring things out because you can see the light's bright. So we can bring things out into the physical world. We plant those seeds of creation and bring our ideas and all of those things into the physical world. Well, hi, Cynthia. So glad you joined me. Oh, my God. What a weird day, guys. I swear. So, in the morning is when I get these inspirations. Okay? And then by the time I get to the evening, I'm like, what was it that I was inspired to say this morning? Oh, my God. So I have to refresh my memory before I get started. So anyway, so tonight I wanted to talk, what they inspired me with this morning was, we're in this time of change and we're trying to find new ways. Okay. There's a lot of blocks in the road, and that's being purposely done, guys. Okay. And it's just becoming unmanageable now. So we have to find new ways. Now, I consider myself a trailblazer, and I want to break out some of those terms too. So blazing a trail doesn't mean setting it on fire and heading off like a bulldozer, okay? The word trailblazing means, so to blaze a trail, you mark the path, okay? So you put these notches in the tree, or you, as you go first, okay, or as you go, you mark the trail so that people who are coming behind you know the way. Okay, so we mark the trees, and as we're going forward. So we feel like we're having to blaze new trails, but honestly, we're really uncovering old trails that haven't been used in a while. Okay, so that's basically what we're doing. All right. And that's, so how do we go from there to there? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm telling you, it's been a day. So again, everybody starts to get a little more, prickly, emotional during the full moon. Okay, the new moon and the full moon are two times where people get interesting. So anyway, so yeah, everybody's feeling like they should be doing something, but they don't always know what they're supposed to be doing. So they kind of run around with their hair on fire, okay? Or they're just all, it can really bring up anxiety if you don't have a plan. And if you do have a plan, it's bringing things out into this physical world. And that's what we're really going to try doing, okay? So blazing the trail. So I always equate this to a road. So think of life like our spiritual journey in this human reality is kind of like a road, okay? So this is one of my metaphors that I use. So it's kind of like a road. Now, guys, not all the roads are paved, okay? And we don't get sent a map and a compass down here, okay? We kind of hit the ground with nothing, So the people around us are teaching us the rules, the ways on this road of life. Sometimes we're, on a skateboard, sometimes we're on a bicycle, sometimes we're in a car, okay? So again, I've been in every kind of flippin' vehicle known to man, okay? I've walked it, rode it, drove it. Oh my God. So anyway, I wait for the inspired thing to take back over again here. So as we're on this journey, okay, we're learning, hopefully, things along the way. Okay, we're learning through our experiences, you know, how things work, how we work, how other people work, how the world works. Okay, and honestly, we all haven't gotten great information, okay? And so all of our experiences are really helpful because you put it into your database. You're like, okay, I had that experience. This is what I learned about myself. This is what I learned about other people. And then the universe actually sends you input. They give you ideas, okay? And so you can pull from that database of experiences and get creative, okay? You get creative, you know, and so, funny story. So let me tell a story. That usually grounds me. So one time, Jared had a gig at a church. And he was with this band, and it was kind of like a tribute to, I don't know, some blues guy. Anyway, so when we came out of this church, there was a blizzard while we were in there, okay? Now, it was not quite winter yet, and it was one of those freak blizzards that happened, okay? One of those freak snowstorms. So we did not have a thing to dust off the car. And so I had a whole bunch of donations in the back of the car. Of course, I always do have some weird shit in my car. Anyway, so I go in the back seat. I found a broom and I found a spatula, okay, like a hamburger flipper, right? Plastic. And there's this young man who was in the band who came out to dust off his car too. And so anyway, so he didn't have anything either. So Jared's got the broom and I've got the spatula because it was all ice, okay? It was like a freak ice snowstorm. And so I'm scraping the window and this kid looks at me. He goes, wow, that's really creative. I said to him, because I'm full of these little idioms, okay? I said, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Well, this young man thought I had just made up that profound saying on the spot. And he went, whoa, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Now, Jared's heard these things his whole life, so he's over there laughing his ass off, okay? And this boy thought I was just the most profound human being on the face of the planet. And, but that's true, guys. Necessity is the mother of invention. And so when we're moving forward in this journey and we're having to meet these forks in the road and we're having to make new choices about where we're going and how are we getting around some of these obstacles that have been purposely placed in our way, you got to kind of stop and look at what you got. What am I working with? What do I have to work with here? Okay. And this is where creativity is so important because, like I said, you know, I grew up with people that were weird and we played these games of being resilient and creative with what we worked with what we had, you know, and so, you know, you can use a hammer 1,000 ways, okay? But if all you got is a hammer, then we're going to use that, okay? Now there are probably better tools, but we don't have them right this minute, and those are the kinds of things that you get as you go. You acquire things, you acquire tools, you acquire knowledge, you acquire wisdom from doing this over and over and over again, repeatedly. And the challenge that we're facing now is that a lot of people have become dependent on convenience, okay, and things that just make life convenient, okay? But now what's happened is we've become dependent on it, and we can't be as creative because we don't have those tools and resources. So we're kind of on a learning curve, and people are having to dust off and learn some new ways of being self-reliant and autonomous and creative when it comes to making solutions in not only their own life but in the world. And this is what I help people do, okay? This is what I do as in personal and spiritual development, is helping you see it differently, see it from a higher spiritual perspective, and then we look at the obstacles and what do you have to work with, and I can give you some new tools, and then I encourage you to go out and go do it, right? Stepping out of your comfort zone, trying new things. And so when we look at this road of life, you know, when we're meeting these obstacles, you have to stop and really look at, what is this obstacle that I'm facing? And what tools do I have to either go through it or around it, right? So we have to look for the clues that the universe gives us along the way. And they do give you clues, okay? So it was really funny. So one time, Jared's dad and I were on a trip. And we were way out west, okay? We were in actually a place called Logan, New Mexico, okay? And we were going to eventually go through the Rocky Mountains. We did this big loop. Anyway, so we're in this place called Logan, New Mexico. And there was this road that we were going to go on. And this road took you, we had to go around this big loop, around this mountain. Okay, or giant hill, okay, which you and I would call a mountain because we're from Ohio, but honestly it was just a gigantic hill. Anyway, but in order there was no way through, so it was like over 100 miles to go all the way around this thing to get where we had to go, to the next highway, right? And so we're looking at the map. Now I can read a map. Jared's dad, it was an excellent map reader, okay? And so we saw across the mountain area, there was this dotted road. Now, a dotted road on the map means it's unpaved, okay? Now, that's not a big deal, okay? I don't mind an unpaved road, but so we get up there, right? And we head off on this incline up to this dotted road, okay? When we got up there, we realized this dotted road was not just unpaved. It was it was a mess. It was boulders that were just barely sticking out of the ground. It was red clay, okay? And then it started to rain, okay? And so then that clay, you know what clay feels like? It looks like when it gets wet? It's slippery. It's very slippery. Now, mind you, we've got a motorcycle, and we've got all our stuff, our tent, all our camping stuff, all those things on the back of the bike, including me, okay? So anyway, this was 10 miles. And it took us 4.5 hours to go 10 miles. And at the end of the road, at the end of this road, come to find out it was a logging road. And it was a place where cattle ranchers would drop their cattle off to be free range for the summer. So anyway, oh my God, so there's a giant puddle across the road. And Jared's dad said, hey, walk out there. I had on chaps and boots and all the things. And he says, walk out there and see how deep that is before I bring the bike across, right? And so I get halfway out into this puddle. It's probably up to my top of my boots, not enough to go in. But anyway, and the minute I get into the middle of this gigantic puddle across this unpaved road, this bull gets out of the weeds. And here there's an entire herd of cows in there, okay, laying down. And we didn't see him. Anyway, this bull got up, and he was literally 10 feet from me, not even. And he looked at me, and I'm covered in leather, and he's looking at me like, what are you doing? Who are you? Yeah, they're not friendly. And he started pawing the ground and snorting. I was like, oh, I'm going to die. I'm going to die, right? And my ex-husband's like, don't move. I'm like, God, don't worry, I'm not. So I started backing up real slow. Anyway, along comes this truck. Okay, this pickup truck full of guys, and they go, why are you people up here, right? And my ex-husband said, well, we're taking a shortcut. And they go, this is a logging road. This is where we drop off cattle, okay? Yeah, humans should not be up here. You guys are not, on the right vehicle for this place. Anyway, and so they chased the cows away, okay? And so we went literally not much farther, and then there was the road down the mountain, this hill, and there was pavement down there. I was never so glad to see a paved road in my life. So now the joke was, don't ever take the dotted line on the map as a shortcut, right? Well, that's it. So you have that in your database now. Things I've done, that was not an epic win, okay? But it wasn't a failure either. And it makes for a good story later. So that makes you more resilient, guys. When you understand that, the obstacles that we faced, we've learned through the ways through, and so when we meet these things again, that's what creates resilience, okay? So the universe sends us signs. So as we're looking now at the roads ahead, and they seem like they're blocked, and they seem like there's no way through, okay? So we have to stop and really look at, the markers. What do we know about this road? Okay, well, this block is being purposely put down. So what is the block? What tools do I have at my disposal that I can use creatively to create solutions, okay, or workarounds to things here? And this is what we're finding, is that what's happening is we've been diverted off the main road, okay, and we're nowhere near where we need to be. Okay, so we got to find our way back to those things. So this isn't about more, it's really about less. Okay, so the blocks that are put in the road are trying to generate fear and tell people they don't have any options, and that isn't necessarily true. And so what we've learned is, now I grew up with people who were very resourceful. They didn't have a lot of money or things, and so they were very good at, working together, working with what they had. They come from poverty. And it was really interesting because with Dolly Parton passing away, her song Coat of Many Colors really had me thinking about that, okay? And, we've been taught that stuff is important. We've become so addicted to convenience that it's taken away our ability to be self-reliant and self-sufficient, okay? And so a lot of people don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to do things what we call the old way, but it's not the old way. It's just another way, okay, where and we just don't have those skills, but we can learn those skills, and we can really dust off those old ways and see how we can live simpler and we can be more self-reliant, okay? But it's going to take creativity and effort, okay? This is the thing. Convenience is convenient, but if it's, taught us to not know how to do stuff, that's a problem, okay? And this is kind of what we're waking up to. So the minute we get self-reliant, the minute we start getting creative and going back to some of these simplistic ways and being more self-reliant in that way and interdependent with each other in the communities, those things lose their power, okay? So they can't control you. They make sure you're dependent. It's kind of like the dope boy making you dependent on drugs, okay? He doesn't give a shit about you, okay? And again, when you stop using, he's out of business, okay? So this is where we're going to have to do a little work in order to look for the markers along the way. So another interesting fact on the road trip of life is so we were in Colorado. And I'm driving, we're down these mountain roads, guys, these highways, okay? And I'm looking at these mountains, and I'm looking at some of these roads out there and these houses way up on the hill. And I'm like, because you get a lot of time sitting back there thinking, because there's nothing to do but look at the scenery, And so I said to myself, how did they get those covered wagons over these Rocky Mountains? Well, so they didn't, the pioneers did not blaze trails, okay, necessarily. So, there were indigenous people here first, okay, and there were animals, okay, and those indigenous people created paths. They created paths, they created ways, okay, they had roads and things, roads through the woods. But they also knew the woods, and they knew they knew the lay of the land, okay? And so when the pioneers came, there were also hunters and there were trappers who went out there and used those trails that the animals made or the indigenous peoples made, and they used those, and they got bigger because more people were traveling on them. So when the pioneers came, they had some access. They weren't having to, necessarily just fell trees to get where they were going, but it wasn't easy. Okay, it wasn't easy. But those roads, and they had to look for the clues. They had to look for the trail that had been blazed before them. Okay, it may not have been big enough for a wagon, but, they could make it bigger, and this is what they did. Okay, so as this westward expansion, which is a fun term, happened, these pioneers were not just blazing the trail through the woods that had nothing. The indigenous peoples who came first actually knew the lay of the land and followed the animals and had created these things. So that's what we're doing now. So even though we don't know the way, okay, and we feel like we're going off into the wilderness, okay, we're not. But what's really happening is we got to look for sometimes the trails that were blazed before you, okay, and trusting those ideas that are coming to you. You know, it's learning to live simpler and more. The less you need, the more you have. Okay, so when we're not dependent, and you can do some of these things for yourself. Now, I'm not saying go from, to be some survivalist. Okay, that's not necessary. But, knowing how to do things, canning food, growing food. My family has always had a garden. And I learned to can food, okay? And so we have freezers now. We don't necessarily have to can it, like mason jars and those things, but that's a skill. Okay, that's a life skill. And those things will get you through the winter, But we have to work cyclically and seasonally, okay? And again, we have farmers. We have local places that do those things where we can start shopping and, instead of prepackaged stuff. But again, we've become a little lazy with doing those things for ourselves. And that's where they gotcha, okay? And people don't know how now to do these things like they used to, okay? So we're all on this learning curve. We're all dialing it back. We're all looking at simpler ways to live and how much do we need and what are we investing our time, energy, and money in. And I just wanted you to know that the universe is giving you ideas. They give you ideas when you're willing to see things in a different way, okay? And again, it's about educating yourself. You can't just wait for someone else to come and give you information. That's the thing I do is I give you information, I change your perspective, I give you a different perspective so that you can see solutions, so that you can get inspired with new ideas. Because if you're only looking at it one way and it's crippled by fear or insecurity or whatever, that limits your options, okay? That limits your options. And again, there's workarounds and there's ways to change this, okay? But it's going to take all of us doing that. So, so again, I'm not saying turn into some kind of off-the-grid survivalist, okay? But there's, things to know. It was really funny. I mean, we went 2 weeks one time with no electricity in that big old house, okay? That was built in 1900. So when it was built, electricity was barely a thing, okay? There were gas fireplaces. There were gas light fixtures that had been converted to electric. I have an oil lamp. I have an oil lamp, and, so because I live in Cleveland, the lights go out all the time. And right now, there's a lot of things that they're doing to control people. And, and so Jared said, how are you going to make coffee in the morning without the coffee maker? I go, Jared, really? You make it on the stove. We had a gas stove. Now, if I didn't have a gas stove, I would come out here and use my barbecue grill. Okay? I have propane. Okay? There's way, how do you think they make coffee? Well, we would go camping and he would watch me make coffee out on the campsite, But again, what do you do if you don't have electricity? How do you exist? And so those are the things that we're really starting to look at, and not in a fear-based reactive way, just, what do I need to learn to make myself more independent of things, okay? And like I said, when you're sitting there with all this useless crap you buy, it's not functional or it breaks. What are you going to do with all those things if something happens and you can't use it? You can't eat it, So anyway, so this is just blazing. We don't have to blaze new trails, guys. Our ancestors left us with tools. And this is why, when people say, oh, that's old-fashioned, okay, well, at the end of the day, I know how to do things, okay? If something happens, I know what to do. I know how to handle that. I've been in those situations before. So you don't have to blaze the trail. So so one of the fun things that came to me this morning was, it's kind of like Christopher Columbus, okay? He thought he discovered something new, okay? He discovered America, okay? He thought it was India, but there were already people here. Okay, you didn't discover shit. Okay, it's new to you, but that doesn't mean it's new. Okay, we have people who have lived on this land, who came here before you did, and so that's kind of how this whole ball started rolling, was invaders or colonizers or, discoverers coming to places thinking that they discovered something and now it belongs to them, whereas there were people here when he showed up, and so he didn't discover anything new. There were already folks here. So since then, that's what we've been dealing with, and I don't think people realize how big the United States is comparatively to places like Europe or France or England or, look at the difference. Okay, this is why we have so many natural resources here, that because our country is so big, okay, which is part of the motivation of the colonization that went on here, was because of the natural resources, okay, and abusing those, okay, for profits. And so, again, this is when we look at history, whether it's our own personal history or our family history or societal history, we need to learn how to be more accountable to ourselves and to, replenishment and all the wonderful things that the universe teaches us, And so anyway, so that's kind of what the universe was inspiring me with. I know it feels overwhelming, guys. Like you've got to, get out there with your machete and blaze the trail, but you don't. Okay, there's clues to ways to do this, and you might call them old-fashioned, but those old wives knew what they were talking about. Okay, I'm an herbalist. It was part of one of my things that had me create the herb store, was because there was a need for it. Okay, but again, people are, taking all these, not that I'm anything wrong with these things. Okay, but prevention is better than trying to treat something once it's a disease, okay? And there's a lot of preventative things that we can do, because that's not how herbalism works. It's not a quick fix thing. It's really based in holistic, nutrition, exercise, taking care of ourselves. And there are things that we can use, but, pharmaceuticals, they're a good thing, but, they're also a for-profit industry right now. And I was, anyway, I'm not going down that rabbit hole today. So I'm just saying we don't have to blaze the trail. There are ways to do this, but it's going to take effort. Okay. And it's going to take us assessing where we're at. How do we get here? What do I need to know? Where can I go to learn those things? And then trust the divine inspiration from the universe, because these blocks are creating fear and trying to influence people to not try to comply, and the only way that we're going to fix this is by not participating, coming together, start supporting each other, and getting it back to basics, back to the some of the old ways, like building communities and supporting local tradesmen, craftsmen, farmers, and learning how to plant food for yourself, learning how to can food. That's not a bad skill to have, guys. And homemade is always better. Okay, it always tastes better. So one time I made, my neighbor did a thing, and he opened up his yard to be a community garden. Well, everybody's good at the onset. Everybody planted all this stuff, but then they never came back to weed it or water it, and he literally had 300 or so tomato plants. Okay, now I do this. I'm a gardener, and nobody came back. So all this stuff was literally rotting on the vine. I would fill my trunk every morning and take it downtown and open my trunk at the parking lot and let people just take produce. So I actually canned tomato sauce. This was the most labor-intensive thing I've ever done. And this is another thing. When you make it yourself, you don't waste it. You won't throw food away, because it's fucking a lot of work. Okay. I had 9 bushels of tomatoes, and that made 13 quarts of sauce. So you have to boil them, you put them through the squeeze-o, You know, you chop them up. You have to boil them. You have to get the seeds and the. I have all this stuff. I have a squeezo. I have the things that you know, a food mill, they call it. You know, I have a canning pot. I know how to use those things. And it was interesting because 13 quarts. Okay, so when you look at your 32-ounce can of tomato sauce, you wouldn't believe how many tomatoes it takes to make that. Okay, and this is why it's just easier to make commercially. However, when I made tomato sauce, okay, and we ate it, it was the best thing you've ever eaten in your whole life, okay? I mean, you didn't wolf down your food. You savored it because it was tasty, okay? In fact, I used to make jelly. I had a friend who had a grape or vines in her yard, and she had Concord grapes. So I went over there. She's like, oh, my God, these grapes are just going to go to waste. So I picked all these grapes. I had 2 bushels of grapes, and I made grape jelly and jam, okay? And so my neighbor, whose husband was Italian, okay, I was giving this stuff away. I was giving away so many jars of jelly. And I gave her one, and she comes back down. She goes, oh, my God, Marianne, where'd you get that jelly? Because my husband just thinks it's the most tasty thing he's ever had. I said, well, I actually made it. She goes, what? I go, yeah. So, I mean, again, guys, homemade is so much better. It's labor intensive, but you also don't waste it, okay? You savor it, you know, so... You know, that's, and putting up food. Like, I make a 13-quart pot of soup and stews to freeze, okay? And so this is what we're looking at. You know, how can we save money? How can we be more diligent in being accountable to, you know, what we're eating, what we're feeding our families, you know, and who are we supporting when we're buying this prepackaged crap that is awful? You know, it's so easy to make, like, pasta. It's, you know, these things aren't actually hard to make. They just take time and effort. You know, but once you make it, you never want to buy store-bought again. Like, really. It's like when you bake bread. Same thing. You know, in fact, when my mother was young, her mother used to make 60 loaves of bread a week. Okay? And if you took store-bought bread to school, people used to make fun of you because they'd say your mother was lazy because she bought store-bought bread. And it's not as nutritionally good. You know what goes into the food you make, you know, and you're bypassing all the chemicals and things, but you have to store it differently. So anyway, so this is my talk tonight. We're not blazing new trails. We're looking at the blazes that were set before you. It tells you you're going the right way. Somebody already went this way. So how can we pay attention to the trails that have been already blazed? Now they've just been covered over. They don't want you going down some of these roads because that would mean they're out of business. Okay? They'd be out of business. If we all got self-reliant and doing those things, you know, I was raised with Depression-era people. The system did fail. And people had victory gardens. You know, they canned their own food. My grandfather, we always had a garden my whole life. And so, you know, my dad grew garlic and other things, you know. So anyway, so this is what we're looking at. And you can do that in pots. Okay, we live in the city and there's not a lot of public land for us to farm with, but we do have local farmers. We do have local gardeners, you know, and so this is where we learn how to take those things and to save them for the winter, you know. And so that's what we're getting back to. We're getting more accountable and more aware of how to do things with what you got. You got to start with what you got, guys, okay? You don't need all the things, you know. Sometimes we just start. You know, we just start with what you have, and then you acquire and accumulate things along the way, you know? You can always borrow tools from your neighbor or come here and I'll give you some tools, you know? And I'm talking about spiritual tools and how to navigate this human world, you know? It's just like kids not reading cursive, okay? That's bad, okay? Because all our historical documents are in handwriting, you know? And so, yeah. So that's what I got. I want to leave you with one last interesting story. So as we're talking about indigenous peoples, my niece is a historian and her husband. And they specialize in indigenous history, okay? So there was this indigenous man who was a scout, okay? And he had memorized over 200,000 acres in his lifetime of all the paths where all the tribes were at where the animals lived. And so one of these trappers, okay, asked him to explain to him, and he made a map of this man's memory, okay? And so this man laid out every hill, what they called it, every road, what they called it, every tribe, you know, herds of animals, you know, all of those things, where the rivers were at, okay? And he did this from memory, okay? And he told this guy and was helping him draw this map. Okay, later on, when they had actual maps that were made, you know, like, you know, aerial photography and, you know, those kinds of things, this guy's map was completely accurate from memory. He'd memorized all of that, going up and down all these trails by going, and 200,000 acres, okay? It was amazing. And if you look that up, that's a true thing. That's a real thing. And so again, guys, lots of people went before us. And these people told us that the old ways were obsolete. Okay, well, there are some things that are great for convenience, okay? But it's nice to know and have things that, you know, from the people who went before you. There's nothing wrong with being self-reliant, because if we're self-reliant, we're harder to oppress and control, okay? And we can take care of each other. You know, nothing was more fun for me than making jelly and giving it to my neighbor. You know, so we share those things. Now, she was Italian, okay? She used to make sauce, okay? So I would give her jelly, she'd give me sauce. She make espresso. My ex-husband would go down there for espresso. You know, and so that's what we did. You know, this is what communities do, is we support each other. You got sauce, I got this, you got an egg, I got sugar. You know, and that's how we coexist. That's how we support each other in communities and neighborhoods. So we got to get back to basics. But you don't have to blaze the trail. Someone already blazed the trail. You know, there were people here before you. It's just that we have not been taught how to do that. So we work with what we have, and we learn as we go. And every time you do something new, it builds confidence. You know? And that's, your kids are watching. You know? Jared made me laugh that day, because when I said, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, okay, that's true. You know, a lot of inventions happen because somebody was in need, so they invented something, okay? But like I said, you got to work with what you got. If all you got is a broom and a spatula, okay, we can get shit done with that. Now, are those great tools? Not for everything, but they get the job done, you know? You don't have to have that special thing to do some of this stuff, you know, that they sell you. Oh, you can't live without this product. You know, you can't be this, or you're not enough if you don't, or whatever, okay? So, yeah, so we want to start assessing things a little different. So, anyway, we don't have to blaze the trail. They were already blazed. Just look for the clues. So go back and look, you know, if we didn't have this, what would we do, right? What would you do? You know, and that makes you resourceful. You know, the interesting thing about even my ancestors and relatives is that, you know, you don't become resilient because things go right all the time. Okay? You have to overcome adversity. You know, you learn from that. You know, this is why, you know, we get ourselves in a situation, we learn from it, and we learn not to do that anymore, or don't do it again. And we change the way, and we start evolving, maturing, and learning. And that builds our confidence. And it takes creativity to navigate some of these things, guys. You got to get creative. You know, this is why with kids, I think giving them creative things is so much more important than just giving them these toys that are one use. They have one use only. That's done intentionally, okay? You know, again, we've got to open up because creativity is where the universe lives. You know, the universe sends us good ideas through, you know, these ideas that come to you. And if you can't be creative, you can't find solutions, okay? I deal with people all the time. Like, I used to do prison reentry. You know, when you're surviving, it's hard to have, you know, some people weren't exposed to creative things. You know, and this is why I do projects with folks, because, you know, when you're creative, it opens up your world to new ways to do stuff. You know, so creativity is powerful, and that's why they go after music and art programs, because creativity is a life skill, okay? If you can't get creative in life, you can't find solutions, okay? And that makes you resilient, okay? It makes you, confident. So anyway, I'm so grateful for you guys tonight. I know that sounded like it was all over the place, but again, as we're blazing these trails, somebody went before you. You just gotta look for the clues, okay? So when they're like, go this way, scare a little rabbit, go this way. Okay, I'm gonna stop. See, I know that if they're diverting me, okay, now I wonder about you. So what don't you want me to see over here? What are you trying to manipulate over here? Okay, so I am opposite. I know that, guys, okay? So if somebody says, everybody goes this way, everybody goes this way, okay, I'm going to stop and go, okay, why don't you want me to go that way? There's, you got to trust that inner knowing, okay? So we always joke about it because they call me Contrary Mary, but it's not because I'm contrary. It's because I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've experienced a lot. I've been deceived. I know, and I know what I know, okay? And there's this intuitive aspect of it as well. I'm good with pattern recognition because of all the things that I've seen. So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, okay? So anyway, so what don't you want me to see? So my family laughs because if there's a sign that says, do not enter, my inherent inner knowing is so curious. I'm going, that sign actually says, do not enter unless you're Marianne Goldweber, okay? I've gone down roads just to see where they go. Sometimes you gotta, turn around and come back. But, now you know. So that's how we learn the lay of the land, guys. You gotta practice. You gotta go down all the roads. You gotta go in all kinds of weather. And this is all metaphoric, okay? I'm just talking about it in storytelling, metaphors. You've got to try things in order to know what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you don't like, good and you're not good at, and how can we build some skills and do those things differently. But you can't do it if you're just sitting on your couch thinking about it, So anyway, I'm so grateful for you guys. Thanks for following. So the little bit of news that I have is I'm setting up all the Halloween seances, okay? So if you want to get your group together during September and October, now's the time. Get your group together. 12 people here in a village, okay? You can have your own food. I supply the soft drinks. So nothing is more inspirational than getting all of your besties and family together and getting some guidance from the other side. We all get read in front of each other. We all get to hear all the messages, and we all get inspired so that when you leave, you have each other to rely on going forward, And so then we're all inspired together. So when you guys go back to your world, it's something you'll talk about for months to come, And it's fun. And I'm funny, okay, guys? You got to have a sense of humor when you've experienced the things I have in life, okay? And a sense of humor can save your life, okay? And a lot of this human stuff is absolute ridiculousness. So, we want to be inspirational in this life, inspiring other people. Your kids are watching you. It was really funny because that day with the spatula in the snowstorm, Jared said to me, he was laughing because he's heard me say this 1,000 times, okay? He knows what it means. But we laughed all the way home because that boy was so funny. He said, necessity is the mother of invention. Like, it twirled his brain. It was hilarious. And Jared's like, oh my God. Because I'm full of those euphemisms. You guys know that. So anyway, yeah, so I'm full of quotes and all those things. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Go to my website, MarianneGoldweber.com. If you want to schedule time with me or a class or a workshop, just give me a call, 216-324-2657. I'm so grateful for you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me today. So we don't have to necessarily blaze the trail and, set it on fire. Okay, blazing is not setting it on fire and moving through like a bulldozer. Okay, it's about looking for the clues about people who've taken the path before you. Now, I blaze the trail. Okay, I will mark the trail and tell people how, it's telling you somebody had to go first. Somebody blazed this trail before you. Somebody marked the way. This is why these ancestors and history is so important. The answers are already there. We just gotta do it. Okay? All right, kids. Well, I hope you have a wonderful night. Thanks for joining me, and keep the peace. Pray for our world, and thank you for your support. Okay?